I dragged my worn suitcase up the marble steps. My daughter burst into laughter in front of the entire serving staff. "Mother, stop embarrassing me at this mansion," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I simply replied, "Is that so?" They thought my suitcase was cheap. They had no idea I'd bought the entire house they were showing off. Tonight, guests would raise their glasses on the terrace. At midnight, the sheriff would raise his hand to knock on the door. My name is Marion O'Keefe, and I've learned that dignity isn't measured by the price tag on your luggage. The Friday evening air in Harbour Ridge carried the sharp tang of salt and privilege. I stood at the entrance of the Seabright Bluffs mansion, my fingers wrapped around the handle of my 12-year-old Samsonite, the same suitcase that had accompanied me through nursing school, through my husband's funeral, through every sacrifice I'd made for my daughter. "Mother, seriously?" Tessa's voice cut through the murmur of arriving guests. She glided across the Italian marble foyer in her designer heels, each click echoing my supposed inadequacy. "You brought that thing here." The serving staff, hired for the evening to celebrate my daughter and her husband's move into the Cole family estate, tried to look busy. But I caught their sideways glances, the barely suppressed smirks. One young woman in a crisp catering uniform actually covered her mouth to hide a giggle. "It served me well," I said quietly, setting the suitcase down beside a 19th century console table that probably cost more than my annual salary at Northbridge Field Partners. "God, you're impossible." Tessa's perfectly manicured fingers pressed against her temple. "Barrett's parents are here. The Weatherbys are here. Half of Harbour Ridge Society is here. And you show up looking like you're checking into a roadside motel." Barrett Cole materialized beside his wife, his arm sliding possessively around her waist. My son-in-law had the kind of good looks that money polishes to perfection's squared jaw, yacht club tan, teeth that belonged in a dental advertisement. "Everything all right, darling?" He didn't look at me when he asked. "Mother insisted on bringing an overnight bag," Tessa said, as if explaining a child's tantrum, even though I specifically told her this wasn't that kind of gathering. "I thought family was always welcome," I said. Barrett's laugh had no warmth in it. "Of course, Mrs. O'Keefe. Though I'm sure you understand. Space is at a premium tonight. We've converted all the guest suites into exhibition spaces for the art collection." The art collection. 6 months ago. Tessa hadn't known a Monet from a macaroni painting. Now she spoke of provenance and brushwork as if she'd been born in a gallery. "She doesn't need to stay," Tessa said quickly. "Mother has her own place in town. That little apartment above the hardware store. Remember, Mother, it's perfectly adequate for your needs." Perfectly adequate. My daughter had learned the Cole family's way of cutting without drawing blood. Every word calculated to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. More guests arrived, flowing around us like we were rocks in a stream. I recognized several faces from the society pages of the Harbour Ridge Gazette, the Prescotts, who owned the largest yacht in the marina, Judge Whitmore and his third wife, the Blackwood twins, heirs to a pharmaceutical fortune. They all greeted Barrett and Tessa with air kisses and practiced smiles, their eyes sliding over me as if I were part of the help. "You know what, Mother?" Tessa's voice dropped to a whisper, but somehow it carried more venom for its softness. "This is exactly why I didn't want you here tonight. You don't understand how things work in this world. You never have." "What world is that?" "Exactly. This world." She gestured at the soaring ceilings, the crystal chandeliers, the original Whistler hanging above the fireplace. The world where people matter, where connections are made, where life actually happens. And I suppose all those years I worked double shifts to pay for your education happened in some other world. Tessa's face flushed. Don't start with the martyrdom, Mother. Not tonight. Please. I'm not starting anything. I'm simply standing here with my suitcase. That's the problem. The words burst out louder than she intended. Several guests turned to look. Tessa composed herself, lowering her voice again. You standing there with that ratty suitcase is a statement. It's you trying to make me feel guilty for moving up in the world, for wanting better. Better. I repeated the word, tasting its bitterness. Barrett's mother, Catherine Cole, chose that moment to sweep into our little drama. She was everything old money was supposed to be, silver-haired, rail-thin, draped in understated couture that whispered rather than shouted its price. Tessa, darling, the Weatherbys are asking for you. Something about the charity auction next month. She turned to me with a smile that never reached her eyes. Marion, isn't it? Marion, I corrected. Of course. How lovely that you could stop by. Stop by. As if I were a delivery person who'd lingered too long. Though I do hope you're not planning to stay late. These evening drives can be so treacherous for people of a certain age. I was 58. Catherine Cole had celebrated her 70th birthday last month with a party that made the Boston Globe. I'll manage, I said. Mother was just leaving, Tessa said quickly. Weren't you? Mother? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. Somewhere beneath the designer dress and the practiced smile was the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The teenager who'd sobbed in my arms when her first boyfriend broke her heart. The young woman who'd called me every day during her father's final illness, just to hear my voice. That girl was gone now, replaced by this polished stranger who saw me as an embarrassment, a reminder of origins she'd rather forget. Yes, I said finally. I suppose I was. I picked up my suitcase. The weight of it was familiar, comforting even. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of myself in the massive gilt mirror by the door. I looked exactly like what I was, a working woman in a sensible dress carrying a practical suitcase. But they saw only what they wanted to see. They didn't notice the Northbridge Field Partners badge in my purse that gave me access to financial records they couldn't imagine. They didn't see the legal documents in my suitcase that would soon redefine their understanding of ownership. They didn't realize that my ratty suitcase contained the key to their kingdom. Goodbye, Tessa, I said. Enjoy your party. As I walked toward the door, I heard Barrett murmur to his mother. Thank God. I thought she'd never leave. And Tessa, my daughter, my blood, my 28 years of sacrifice laughed in agreement. The drive back to my apartment took me past Harbour Ridge Memorial Hospital. Even at 8:30 in the evening, the emergency room glowed with harsh fluorescent light. I knew that light intimately had lived under it for 23 years, while Tessa grew from infant to woman. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as memories flooded back. 4A. Feedings between shifts. Studying for my nursing administration exams while she coloured at the kitchen table. The night Robert's diagnosis came through acute myeloid leukemia, and I held Tessa as we both sobbed in the hospital parking lot, the same one I was passing now. Robert had been a good man, a postal worker with gentle hands and infinite patience. When he died, Tessa was 17. The life insurance paid out $42,000. Every financial advisor said the same thing: use it for her college, invest in her future. But I saw something else in those numbers: opportunity. That's when I met James Northbridge at a grief support group, not as a fellow mourner, but as a guest speaker about financial planning after loss. While others saw a predator circling the vulnerable, I recognized a different kind of shark, one I could swim alongside. His firm, Northbridge Field Partners, specialized in distressed assets. Real estate bought cheap, held smart, sold high. "You have the instincts," he'd told me after I questioned his numbers on a proposed medical plaza investment. Ever think about contract accounting? The thing about growing up poor is you learn to see value where others see trash. My mother had furnished our entire house from estate sales and bankruptcies. She taught me to spot quality beneath neglect, potential beneath tarnish. Those lessons served me well at Northbridge. Within 18 months, I'd transitioned from night nursing to day accounting. Though I kept my nursing license, current old habits, and backup plans, the pay was better, the hours more human. But more importantly, I learned how money really moved, how property really worked, how the wealthy stayed wealthy. Meanwhile, Tessa bloomed at Dartmouth, pre-law, she'd declared, full of fire about justice and equality. I drove up every month with care packages and checks for whatever she needed: books, clothes. That spring break trip to Cancun she swore was educational. I never said no. How could I? Every opportunity I gave her was one I'd never had. Then Barrett Cole appeared senior year. Old money from 3 generations of Maine shipping fortune. He was getting his MBA, planning to take over the family's portfolio of coastal properties. Tessa's passion for justice quietly morphed into enthusiasm for estate law. Her graduation outfit cost more than my monthly rent, a gift from the Coles. She'd explained, because first impressions matter in law. The transformation accelerated after their engagement. Suddenly, my daughter spoke in a different register, held her fork differently, laughed at different things. She'd mention summering as a verb and refer to cars as vehicles. When I'd visit their first apartment, a Back Bay brownstone the Coles owned, she'd apologize for my clothes before I'd even removed my coat. "Mother, you have to understand," she'd said 6 months ago, while we sat in a restaurant I couldn't afford, but she'd insisted on. "Barrett's world has expectations, standards. I'm not saying you're not good enough, but couldn't you just try a little harder? Try harder." As if the trying had ever stopped. The final break came 3 weeks before tonight's party. Tessa had called, breathless and urgent. She and Barrett had overextended on a yacht purchase. Just a small loan. She'd promised $50,000. They'd pay it back within the year. I had the money. What Tessa didn't know was that I had much more. 5 years of strategic investment with Northbridge, careful cultivation of my own portfolio, and one spectacularly lucky bet on a medical complex development had transformed that initial $42,000 into something substantial. The LLC I'd formed, Seabright Holdings, was my secret, my safety net, my future. "I can't," I'd told her. "Can't or won't. Does it matter? You're sitting on Dad's life insurance like a dragon on gold." She'd spit. "He would want you to help us. Your father would want you to live within your means." My God, you're jealous. You're actually jealous that I married well. You married a man who makes you ashamed of your mother. The silence that followed stretched like a year. Finally, she spoke, each word precise as a blade. "Maybe I've always been ashamed. Maybe Barrett just gave me permission to admit it. I hadn't spoken to her again until tonight. The bitter irony was that 2 years ago, when the Coles had nearly lost everything in a failed development deal, I'd been the anonymous buyer who'd saved them. Through Seabright Holdings. I'd purchased their crown jewel, the Seabright Bluffs mansion, and leased it back to them at below market rate. The terms were generous, meant to preserve their dignity while protecting my investment. James Northbridge had thought I was too soft. Never let emotion into real estate, he'd warned. But I wasn't being emotional. I was being strategic. The lease contained very specific clauses about property use, maintenance, and grounds for immediate termination. Clauses that a desperate family would sign without reading carefully. Clauses that their lawyer son-in-law should have caught, but didn't. Too proud to imagine they'd ever be on the wrong side of a contract. My apartment came into view, yes, above the hardware store, as Tessa had so dismissively noted. What she didn't know was that I owned the entire building. The hardware store, the flower shop next door, the insurance office on the corner. My little apartment was actually a carefully renovated space with harbour views and original hardwood floors I'd restored myself. I parked and climbed the back stairs, my suitcase bumping against each step. Inside, I set it on the kitchen table and opened it carefully. Not clothes inside, but documents, contracts, bank statements, photographs of tonight's party preparations showing clear violations of the lease terms, structural modifications to the terrace, unauthorized electrical work for the lighting, commercial-grade equipment installed without permits. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia Hale. My attorney, Sheriff's Department confirmed for midnight. Locksmith on standby. Are you certain? I looked at the photo Tessa had posted on Instagram an hour ago. She stood on the mansion's terrace, champagne in hand, Barrett beside her. The caption read, "Living our best life in our dream home." So blessed, and thank God, certain people finally got the hint to leave early. Certain people. I texted Patricia back, "Proceed as planned." Then I made myself a cup of tea, the good stuff, imported from England, that I'd never served when Tessa visited because she'd mock me for putting on airs and sat down to wait. The real entertainment would begin in 3 hours. The morning after the party announcement, I began my withdrawal. Not dramatic. Not announced, just a quiet cessation of services that had somehow become expected. Saturday, 9:15 a. Tessa called. "Mother, I need you to pick up the alterations for my charity gala dress. The boutique closes at noon." "I'm unavailable," I said, watching the harbour from my window. "What do you mean, unavailable? You're never unavailable on Saturdays." "Things change." She hung up. 20 minutes later, another call. This time about Barrett's dry cleaning, which I'd been collecting every Tuesday for 6 months because the cleaner was on my way, and Barrett was so busy with important meetings. "I won't be doing that anymore," I informed her. "Is this about last night, God?" "Mother, you're being childish." "I'm being accurate. Your husband's errands aren't my responsibility." The silence stretched before she spoke again. "Fine. We'll manage." They didn't manage well. Tuesday came and went. Barrett's Princeton reunion blazer remained at the cleaner's. Thursday, Tessa called frantically. She'd forgotten about a foundation tax document that needed filing. For 2 years, I'd handled their charitable paperwork, my accounting expertise saving them thousands in fees. "The deadline is tomorrow," she pleaded. "Then you'd better hurry." "Mother, please. You know I don't understand those forms." Neither did I, until I learned. Your laptop has internet access, doesn't it? Each withdrawn service revealed how much invisible labor I'd provided, the monthly household budget I'd maintained for them gone, the insurance claims I'd filed when Barrett's Mercedes had that fender bender not my problem, the wedding thank you notes I'd helped address because Tessa claimed carpal tunnel from her yoga classes they could hire someone. But I wasn't just withdrawing, I was documenting. Every text message went into a folder. Your selfishness is astounding, Tessa wrote when I declined to coordinate her mother-in-law's birthday dinner. A real mother would help, she added when I refused to call in a favor with a Harbour Ridge Planning Board member for their pool renovation. The audio recordings were more damning. I'd started carrying a small digital recorder after consulting with Patricia Hale. Maine is a one-party consent state. Only one person in a conversation needs to know it's being recorded. The family meeting at the Cole estate proved particularly fruitful. They'd summoned me, actually used that word, summoned to discuss my recent hostility. Catherine Cole presided like a queen at the head of her dining table. Barrett's father, Harrison, sat to her right. Bourbon already in hand at 2 p.m. Tessa and Barrett flanked them like lieutenants. "We're concerned," Catherine began, "about your influence on Tessa." "My influence?" I kept my voice neutral, the recorder running in my purse. This divisiveness, this withholding, it's not healthy for a young marriage. I see. And what would be healthy? Harrison leaned forward, his Yale class ring catching the light. Understanding your place in the family structure. Tessa has elevated herself. She's a Cole now. That comes with certain expectations of distance from her former circumstances. Former circumstances, as if poverty were a medical condition. "You mean from me?" I clarified. "If you insist on being blunt," Catherine said, "yes, your presence creates confusion. Tessa needs to fully integrate into our social circle without the constant reminder of where she came from." I turned to my daughter. "Is this what you want?" She couldn't meet my eyes. "Mother, it's complicated. The women at the club, they ask questions. About you, about before. And you're ashamed." "I'm trying to fit in." The words burst out. "Do you know what it's like being the only one whose mother worked nights, the only one who went to public school, the only one whose father was a mailman?" "Your father was a good man," Barrett snorted. "Good doesn't get you into the yacht club." "No," I agreed. "For that, you need someone else's money." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Excuse me." Harrison's voice carried decades of privilege affronted. "Nothing. I simply meant that social climbing requires resources." "We're not climbing," Barrett said coldly. "We've been at the top for generations. It's Tessa who's ascending, despite the weight of her background." I stood to leave. Catherine's voice followed me. "We've consulted with our attorney about this situation. There are legal ways to formalize distance, if necessary, restraining orders, if you become too difficult." I stopped at the door. "Your attorney? Would that be young Marcus from the Prescott firm? How did you—" "Yes." "Interesting. Did Marcus happen to review your real estate holdings recently?" They exchanged glances. "Our properties are none of your concern." "Of course not. I was just curious if he'd noticed any irregularities in your lease agreements." The seed of doubt I planted that day would bloom soon enough. That evening, I met Patricia at her office. She spread the photographs across her desk, images I'd taken during my last helpful visit to the mansion. The unauthorized construction was extensive. They'd built a permanent bar structure on the terrace, drilled into load-bearing beams for their art lighting, and removed original fixtures to install a modern security system, all clear lease violations. "This is enough for immediate termination," Patricia said. "But are you sure this is your daughter?" "My daughter died the day she chose their money over my dignity." Patricia studied me over her reading glasses. "That's not true. And you know it. If she were really dead to you, this wouldn't hurt so much." She was right, of course. Every withdrawn service, every documented slight, every recorded insult, they all carved pieces from my heart. But sometimes, love means letting someone face consequences. "The party," I said, changing the subject. "They're planning something big for next Friday, a social media event. 300 guests, live streaming, the works." "Perfect," Patricia smiled. "The more public, the better. Nothing like an audience for a lesson in humility." I gathered my copies of the documents. They still have no idea. How could they? The LLC was brilliantly structured. Your name appears nowhere on the public records. As far as they know, Seabright Holdings is just another corporate landlord. And the sheriff. Ready when we are. The moment they violate fire capacity and with 300 guests, we can execute the termination. The beauty is, they signed an acceleration clause. The minute they're in violation, the entire remaining lease amount comes due. They can't pay that. No. Patricia agreed. They can't. I left her office and drove past the mansion. Even from the road, I could see the party preparations accelerating, tents going up, extra power lines being run, a dance floor being constructed right where the lease specified no permanent structures. My phone buzzed. Tessa again. "Mother, I need the contact for that florist you used for Dad's funeral. The one we're using is too expensive." I didn't respond. Let her figure it out. Let her learn what it costs when you burn the bridges that carried you across. The recorder in my purse held enough evidence now. The files in my suitcase were complete. The trap was set. Baited with their own arrogance. All that remained was to accept my invitation to the party and watch it spring shut. The Harbour Ridge Yacht Club occupied prime waterfront real estate, all weathered shingles and white trim that whispered old money. I arrived for Tuesday's charity luncheon deliberately 10 minutes late, knowing Tessa would already be holding court at the Cole family table. The maitre d' recognized me not as a member, but as Tessa's mother, a distinction that meant I could enter but never belong. "Mrs. O'Keefe, right this way." The main dining room sparkled with crystal and pretension. Every table held women who'd never worked a day in their lives, discussing their exhaustion from managing help and planning galas. I spotted Tessa immediately, centered at a table overlooking the marina, surrounded by her new tribe. "Mother." Her voice pitched high with alarm. "What are you doing here?" "I was invited." I produced the invitation Patricia had procured through a client. "The Literacy Foundation luncheon, isn't it? I've always supported childhood reading programs." The women at Tessa's table exchanged glances. Miranda Weatherby, Queen Bee of the under-30 set, smiled with all the warmth of a January ocean. "How charitable of you." I sat at an adjacent table, close enough to hear, but not technically intruding. My table mates included 2 foundation board members who knew me from my Northbridge work. We discussed tax-efficient giving strategies while I listened to Tessa's conversation. Your mother seems... Miranda paused delicately. Involved. She's going through something. Tessa said quickly. Empty nest syndrome. Probably. Maybe menopause. You know how they get. They... As if I were a different species? At least she's dressed appropriately today. Another woman offered. Remember last month when she wore that same black dress to 3 events? Quality over quantity, I said, just loud enough to carry. One good dress beats a closet full of designer knockoffs. The woman flushed. Her authentic Chanel was a very good fake. But I'd learned to spot replicas during my years handling estate liquidations for Northbridge. Mother. Tessa's voice carried warning and embarrassment in equal measure. Perhaps you should focus on your own table. Of course, dear. I wouldn't want to embarrass you. I turned back to my companions, but not before adding, again? The luncheon progressed with painful politeness. Then Catherine Cole arrived, late and grand, sweeping past my table without acknowledgement. She air-kissed Tessa and began discussing the upcoming party. 300 confirmed guests, Catherine announced. The governor's wife might attend. We've hired that documentary filmmaker to capture everything. The mansion will look stunning, Miranda gushed. That terrace renovation you did is incredible. My phone recorded from my purse as Catherine detailed the renovations, every violation documented from her own mouth. The permanent pavilion they'd built, the industrial kitchen equipment installed without permits, the improvements that violated both building codes and lease terms. We've invested nearly $500,000 in updates, Harrison Cole added, joining his wife. It's finally worthy of the Cole name. Invested in property they didn't own. The irony was delicious as the overpriced salmon. After the main course, I excused myself to the powder room. Tessa followed. What are you trying to prove? She demanded the moment the door closed. I'm attending a charity luncheon. What are you trying to hide? You know what I mean. This sudden interest in my social circle. The comments. The looks. The truth. She gripped the marble counter. The truth. The truth is, you can't stand that I've succeeded beyond your small little life, that I don't need you anymore. Is that what you call this success? I'm living in a mansion. I'm married to a wonderful man. I have everything I ever wanted. You're living in a house you don't own. Married to a man who treats your mother like dirt, pretending to be someone you're not. At least I'm someone... The words exploded out. Not just another invisible middle-aged woman counting pennies and clipping coupons. I looked at my daughter in the mirror. Her face, so like mine at that age, twisted with a disdain I'd never worn. You're right. I am invisible. It's amazing what people say around someone they don't really see. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Enjoy your lunch. Tessa. I left her there and returned to the dining room, where dessert was being served. The conversation had shifted to the party preparations. I listened as they discussed the pyrotechnic display they'd planned illegal without permits in Harbour Ridge. The open bars they'd set up throughout the house, a commercial operation requiring licenses. The tent that would block fire exits, a violation that would trigger immediate evacuation orders. Every word recorded. Every violation noted. As the luncheon ended, I found myself at the valet stand beside Harrison Cole. He looked through me while waiting for his Bentley, speaking into his phone about the party. Yes, the sound system installation is complete. We removed that wall to improve acoustics. A structural wall, according to the original blueprints I'd studied. The dance floor's built directly into the terrace now. Permanent fixture. His car arrived. As he tipped the valet, a young man who'd probably never see that much money in a week of wages. Harrison's transaction receipt fell from his wallet. I picked it up. "You dropped this." He looked at me, really looked for the first time. "Do I know you?" "I'm Tessa's mother." His face shifted through recognition to dismissal. "Right. The nurse. Former nurse? Current concerned citizen? Concerned about what? Fire safety, building codes, lease violations, the usual." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Lease we don't lease, Mrs. O'Keefe." "Right. O'Keefe. We own that mansion outright. Have for generations." "Interesting. Public records suggest otherwise." His smile faltered slightly. "Public records are often incomplete. Or, sometimes, too complete. Enjoy your afternoon, Mr. Cole." I drove straight to Patricia's office with the recordings. She listened with a lawyer's satisfaction at evidence freely given. "They're practically building a case against themselves," she said. "Every violation publicly announced. It's almost too easy. Pride makes people stupid." Speaking of pride, there's something else. Patricia pulled out a folder. The financial forensics came back on Cole Industries. Their leverage to the hilt. The only thing keeping them afloat is the social capital from that mansion. If they lose it, they lose everything. Your daughter included. She's personally guaranteed several of Barrett's loans. I stared at the numbers. Tessa would be ruined alongside them. She made her choice. You could warn her. I tried. At the luncheon. She called me invisible and pathetic. Patricia touched my hand gently. "You're the least pathetic person I know. And Friday night? You'll be very visible indeed." That evening, I received a text from Tessa. "Mother, your behavior today was unacceptable. You're not welcome at the party Friday. Security will have your photo." I responded, "Understood." Security would have my photo, but they'd also have a court order that superseded any guest list. I spent the rest of the week preparing, documents organized, sheriff's department briefed, locksmith scheduled. Patricia would accompany me with the legal papers. The fire marshal, tipped off about the violations, would arrive at 11:45 p.m. My suitcase sat by the door, packed not with clothes, but with contracts, deeds, and the proof of who really owned what. The same suitcase they'd mocked, the same one that would carry their eviction. Friday arrived grey and drizzling, perfect weather for what was to come. The party started at 8 p.m. By midnight. Tessa would understand that some distances, once created, can never be crossed again, and that the price of choosing money over family is sometimes everything you thought you owned. The paper trail of ownership stretched back 2 years, to a humid August afternoon when Cole Industries had hemorrhaged money on a failed resort development in Florida. I remembered that day precisely because I'd watched Harrison Cole pace our Northbridge conference room, his Yale confidence cracking like old paint. "We need liquidity," he'd said. Not to me. I was just the contract accountant taking notes, but to James Northbridge. "The Seabright property. It's our crown jewel. But you need cash more than crown jewels." James had finished. The Coles had bought themselves time with a sale-leaseback arrangement. Seabright Holdings LLC would purchase the mansion for $8 million, then lease it back to the Coles for a generous 24 months at below-market rate. It looked like kindness. It was actually a trap wrapped in mercy. What Harrison hadn't known, what none of them knew, was that I was Seabright Holdings' majority stakeholder. The initial structure had been James's idea, a teaching moment for his newest protege. "Never use your own name on the big plays," he'd instructed. "Let the LLC be the face. You be the brain." I'd pooled my carefully saved money with two other investors James brought in. But when the market dipped 6 months later, one investor needed out. I bought his shares. When the second investor relocated to Singapore, I acquired hers too. By the time the Coles signed their lease, I owned 62% of Seabright Holdings, with James holding 30% and a silent partner taking the remaining 8%. The lease terms seemed standard unless you read carefully. Section 7, subsection 3. Any structural modifications, commercial operations, or code violations constitute immediate breach. Section 9, subsection 2. Upon breach, lessor may reclaim property with 24 hours notice, or immediately if public safety is compromised. The masterpiece was Section 12. Lessees acknowledge property value at $8 million and agree that any improvements become property of lessor upon lease termination. $500,000 in renovations. Catherine had bragged. All legally mine the moment they breached. Patricia had reviewed every word. This is ironclad. They can't claim ignorance. Barrett's signature is on every page. He was probably too proud to admit he was signing a lease instead of a deed. The financial excavation revealed more. Coal Industries wasn't just struggling, it was dancing on bankruptcy's edge. The Florida disaster had been followed by 2 more failed developments. The only thing maintaining their credit was the fiction that they still owned the mansion. "Look at this," Patricia had shown me last week. "They've been using the property as collateral for new loans. That's fraud, since they don't own it." What about Tessa's exposure? She co-signed on 3 loans totaling $2 million. When this collapses, she'll be liable. Part of me, the mother part, wanted to warn her. But then I remembered her laughter when Barrett called me pathetic. Her silence when Catherine suggested a restraining order. Her text uninviting me from the party. The insurance documents told another story. The Coles had let their liability coverage lapse 4 months ago, probably to save money. But they'd kept the property insurance current on a property they didn't own. Insurance fraud, if pressed. Meanwhile, my own position had strengthened. The lots surrounding the mansion purchased quietly through different LLCs were mine. The beach access, the Coles used mine. The private road they treated as their driveway mine, with an easement that expired next month. "You've built a fortress around them," Patricia observed. "They just don't know they're surrounded." The Thursday before the party, I'd done a final reconnaissance. Dressed as a delivery person, amazing how invisible uniforms make you, I'd documented everything. The permanent pavilion they'd built, where the lease specified no permanent structures. The industrial kitchen ventilation system installed without permits. The dance floor bolted directly into the historic terrace, destroying original tilework. Each violation photographed, measured, catalogued. The fire capacity issue would be the trigger. The mansion was rated for 150 occupants. They'd invited 300. The temporary structures blocked 2 of 4 exits. The pyrotechnics they'd planned violated both city ordinance and lease terms. "We strike at 11:45. Patricia strategized. The party peaks. Everyone's attention is on the festivities. The fire marshal arrives for the inspection we've requested. He finds violations, orders immediate evacuation. While they're scrambling, we serve the breach notice and termination. And the sheriff, Standing by with the locksmith. The second that notice is served, the property reverts to Seabright Holdings. Anyone remaining becomes a trespasser. I studied the timeline we'd mapped out. What about their personal belongings? They have 72 hours to remove them. Under supervision? Standard eviction protocol. The art collection. Patricia smiled. Interesting question. If it's attached to the walls, and most of it is, it could be argued as a fixture that stays with the property. The Coles art collection was worth more than the mansion itself. Harrison had spent 30 years acquiring it, each piece a trophy of wealth and taste. I don't want their art, I said. I want them to take it, to stand there packing up their pretensions while everyone watches. The media will be there. They've invited society reporters, photographers, that documentary crew Catherine mentioned. Perfect. Let them document the fall. We'd even prepared for legal challenges. Patricia had 3 junior partners ready with injunctions if the Coles tried to resist. The sheriff had backup units on standby. The locksmith would begin changing locks while guests were still gathering their coats. There's one thing, Patricia said carefully. Your daughter doesn't know you're behind this. When she finds out, she made her choice. She chose them. She chose wealth. There's a difference. Is there? When wealth requires you to abandon family. Patricia gathered the papers. Just remember, once we do this, there's no going back. You'll have your justice, but you'll lose your daughter. I lost her the day she married Barrett Cole. But that wasn't entirely true. I'd lost her gradually, in small betrayals and tiny abandonments. The missed birthdays, because the Coles had yacht club events. The forgotten Mother's Days, because Miranda Weatherby was hosting brunch. The slow erasure of every tradition we'd shared, replaced by their hollow rituals. The login credentials for the property management system showed me everything in real time. Security cameras I could access, they'd never changed the default passwords. Work orders that revealed they'd hired a pyrotechnic company for a midnight surprise. Guest list that confirmed 312 attendees, 312 witnesses to their humiliation. My phone showed missed calls from unknown numbers, probably vendors Tessa had given my contact to, assuming I'd handle problems like I always had. The florist needing payment confirmation, the caterer with dietary restriction questions, the valet service requiring insurance certificates. I answered none of them. Let chaos brew. The final document in my arsenal was perhaps the cruelest. A printout of Tessa's Instagram from 3 months ago, a video of her giving a tour of our ancestral home to her followers. This has been in Barrett's family for generations, she'd said, standing in the library I now legally owned. We're so blessed to carry on the tradition. That video would be evidence of their fraud when creditors came calling. Patricia called Thursday evening. Final check. Are you certain? They're charging people $500 a ticket, I said. Calling it a charity gala for the hospital, the same hospital where I worked nights while raising Tessa. They haven't registered as a charity fundraiser. That's wire fraud if anyone wants to press it. You've thought of everything. I learned from the best. The Coles taught me how the wealthy destroy each other. They just never imagined I was taking notes. Tomorrow night, while they celebrated their superiority, I would arrive with my worn suitcase and a court order. They thought they owned everything. They were about to learn they owned nothing at all. Friday arrived wrapped in coastal fog that would burn off by evening, leaving perfect conditions for an outdoor gala. I spent the morning reviewing the timeline with Patricia one final time. Every detail had been mapped to the minute. "Security has your photo," Patricia reminded me. "They'll try to stop you at the gate." Let them try. The court order supersedes their guest list. At 6 p.m., I monitored the mansion's security cameras from my laptop. Workers scurried across the grounds like ants, erecting the final tent poles, stringing lights, positioning speakers that would violate noise ordinances by 9 p.m. The pyrotechnic team unloaded crates near the terrace, enough firepower to trigger immediate evacuation once the fire marshal saw them. 7 p.m. The caterers arrived with trucks that blocked the service road, another violation. They began setting up bars in 5 locations throughout the house. Without a liquor license for commercial service, each bar represented a separate infraction. 7:45 p.m. I dressed carefully. The same black dress they'd mocked. But tonight, I added my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one piece of real jewelry I owned. I packed my suitcase methodically: court orders, lease documents, ownership papers, cease and desist letters, eviction notice. The weight of justice in worn Samsonite. 8:15 p.m. Guests began arriving. Through the security feed, I watched Porsches and Bentleys line up for valet service. Women in gowns that cost more than most annual salaries. Men in tuxedos checking their Rolexes, calculating their importance. 8:30 p.m. Tessa appeared on the main camera, greeting guests at the entrance. She wore a silver gown that caught the light like mercury. Barrett stood beside her, his hand possessive on her waist. They looked like magazine covers, if you didn't notice how her smile never reached her eyes. 9 p.m. Patricia texted, "Fire marshal briefed and ready. Sheriff units in position. Locksmith on standby." 9:30 p.m. The party hit full swing. Through the cameras, I counted heads. 208. 230, 270. The documentary crew Catherine had hired moved through the crowd, capturing every moment of excess. 10 p.m. The first noise complaint would have been filed by now. I'd made sure the neighbours knew their rights regarding commercial events in residential zones. 10:30 p.m. I drove towards Seabright Bluffs, my suitcase in the trunk. Patricia following in her Mercedes. The sheriff's units stayed back, waiting for our signal. 10:45 p.m. We reached the gate. The security guard, predictably, tried to stop us. "You're not on the list, ma'am." "I don't need to be." Patricia stepped forward, handing him the court order. "This grants immediate access for property inspection." He fumbled with his radio, calling for backup. By the time Harrison Cole's security chief arrived, Patricia had 2 more legal documents ready. "This is harassment," the security chief blustered. "This is law." Patricia corrected. "Stand aside or face obstruction charges." 11 p.m. We walked up the driveway I legally owned toward the mansion I'd purchased. My suitcase wheels clicked against the pavement in steady rhythm. Party sounds grew louder: music, laughter, the clink of champagne flutes celebrating wealth built on quicksand. 11:15 p.m. We entered through the service door, using the master access code the Coles hadn't thought to change. The kitchen was chaos: caterers everywhere, food that would never be served, champagne that would never be drunk. 11:30 p.m. We positioned ourselves in the main hallway, watching through doorways as the party reached crescendo. Catherine Cole held court near the fireplace, regaling listeners with stories of our family estate. Harrison showed off the renovations to a group of investors, unaware he was describing improvements to my property. 11:40 p.m. I saw Tessa in the ballroom, posing for photos with Miranda Weatherby and the yacht club crowd. She threw her head back, laughing at something Barrett whispered. For a moment, she looked happy, young, like the daughter I'd raised. Then she turned and saw me. Her face went white, then red. She started toward me, fury in every step, but Patricia held up a hand. "Not yet," she murmured. 11:45 p.m. The fire marshal arrived, right on schedule. Fire Chief Robert Hernandez, whom I'd known since his mother and I worked night shifts together, entered with 2 inspectors. They moved through the crowd with professional efficiency, their uniforms parting the sea of gowns and tuxedos. "Capacity violation," Hernandez announced, his voice cutting through music. "This structure is rated for 150. I count over 300. The music stopped. Conversations died. 300 faces turned toward the commotion. Additionally, Hernandez continued, checking his tablet, I see multiple fire exits blocked, unpermitted pyrotechnics, and structural modifications without inspection certificates. Harrison Cole pushed forward. "This is a private event?" "Sir, this is a public safety issue. This gathering must disperse immediately." "This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am?" "You're someone operating an illegal commercial event in a residential zone." Patricia stepped forward. "And you're about to be someone who's evicted." She handed Harrison the papers. His face went from red to purple as he read. "What is this? Breach of lease notification? Immediate termination? Property to be vacated within 1 hour. Lease, we own this property." "No," I said, stepping into the light. "I do." The silence that followed was complete. 300 people stared as I walked forward, pulling my suitcase behind me. "Seabright Holdings, LLC owns this property," I continued, opening my suitcase and removing the deed. "I own 62% of Seabright Holdings. You've been tenants for 2 years. Catherine laughed, sharp and dismissive. "This is absurd. Barrett, call our lawyer." "I think you'll find," Patricia said, "that Marcus Prescott has been relieved of his duties regarding this matter. Conflict of interest, representing tenants while his firm represents the actual owner." Barrett grabbed the papers from his father. His face went white as he read. This can't be legal." "Your signature on every page suggests otherwise." Patricia noted, 11:55 p.m. The sheriff arrived with 6 deputies. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sheriff Davidson announced I'd gone to high school with him, though the Coles wouldn't know that, "This event is terminated. Please collect your belongings and exit immediately." The documentary crew kept filming. Society reporters began typing furiously on phones. The transformation from gala to disaster took less than 60 seconds. "Mother." Tessa finally found her voice. How could I, what refused to be your doormat, decline to subsidize your pretensions? Stop enabling your shameful treatment of the woman who sacrificed everything for you. You're destroying us." "No, dear. You destroyed us the day you chose them over family. I'm just returning the favor." The locksmith's van pulled up outside, visible through the windows. Deputies began herding guests toward exits. The bars were shut down, the music system unplugged. The lights brought up to harsh brightness, revealing the party's bones. Midnight. "You have 1 hour to vacate," Patricia announced. Personal belongings may be retrieved within 72 hours under supervision. The premises must be empty by 1 hour. Harrison made one last attempt. We'll sue. Please do. Patricia smiled. I look forward to presenting evidence of insurance fraud, wire fraud, and fraudulent loan applications in open court. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured balloon. I watched them scatter guests fleeing to cars, caterers packing up, security guards abandoning posts. The Coles stood in their own foyer like refugees, Catherine clutching her pearls, Harrison on his phone desperately calling lawyers who wouldn't answer at midnight. Barrett and Tessa huddled together, their silver glow tarnished under harsh lights. Where will we go? Tessa asked him. Your mother's apartment is available, I said. Above the hardware store. I hear it's perfectly adequate. The grandfather clock in the main hall chimed 12:15 a.m. Deputies moved through rooms, ensuring evacuation while the locksmith began his work on the front entrance. The documentary crew, sensing the story of the decade, kept their cameras rolling despite Catherine Cole's shrill demands to stop. You need to see this, Patricia said, holding up her tablet. The society pages were already exploding. Cole family evicted from historic mansion ran across the Harbour Ridge Gazette's emergency update. Someone had live-streamed the sheriff's arrival. The video already had 10,000 views. Harrison Cole stood in what was no longer his study, phone pressed to ear, trying to reach anyone who might help. Each call went unanswered. When you fall from heights like theirs, no one wants to catch you. This is theft, Catherine shrieked at me. You manipulated us. I offered you below-market rent when you were desperate, I replied calmly. You signed every document. Where's the manipulation? Barrett slammed his fist on the marble console table, my marble console table. You knew we thought we were buying it back. What you thought and what you signed are two different things. Perhaps next time, read the contracts instead of assuming your name means something. The sheriff approached. 20 minutes remaining. Tessa hadn't moved from the ballroom doorway. Her silver dress pooled around her feet like spilled mercury. She stared at me with eyes I didn't recognize, wild, desperate, disbelieving. 58 years, I said to her. That's how long I've been alive. 28 of those years. I spent raising you. Every night shift. Every double shift. Every sacrifice, all for you. And you threw me away for this. I gestured at the emptying mansion. For them? You don't understand? I understand perfectly. You were ashamed of me. The nurse mother. The small apartment. The wrong side of Harbour Ridge. I embarrassed you simply by existing. That's not June 15th. I interrupted. You told Miranda Weatherby your mother was dead, rather than admit I was serving drinks at the hospital fundraiser. I was standing 3 feet away. Tessa's face crumbled. Barrett reached for her, but she pulled back. July 20th. You introduced me to your Yale friends as the help when I delivered your forgotten passport for your European trip. I was joking. August 3rd. You signed a letter, drafted by their lawyer, suggesting I seek psychological help for my obsessive attachment to you. Patricia produced the letter from her briefcase, Tessa's signature at the bottom, clear as day. September 10th. You laughed, actually laughed, when Barrett called me a charity case at your engagement party. Each date hit like a hammer. Around us, the mansion emptied, but in our bubble of confrontation, time stopped. October 2nd. You told me not to attend your wedding unless I could dress appropriately, knowing I couldn't afford what you considered appropriate. Mother, please. November 18th. You posted on social media about being self-made, never mentioning the woman who made you. The live stream viewers had grown to 50,000. Comments flooded in, most supporting the badass mom getting revenge. The documentary director moved closer, capturing every word. December 23rd. You spent Christmas in Aspen with them while I ate Chinese takeout alone. You said you were fine with it. What else could I say you'd already chosen? Barrett, finally understanding the scope of disaster, turned on Tessa. You said she had nothing. You said she was nobody. She is nobody. Tessa screamed, then caught herself, but too late. The word echoed in the marble foyer. Nobody. The cameras captured it. The live stream preserved it. 50,000 witnesses to her declaration. I smiled the first genuine smile in months. You're right. I am nobody. Nobody important. Nobody wealthy. Nobody worth knowing in your world. But I'm somebody who owns this house. Somebody who holds your loans. Somebody who just ended your fairy tale. Sheriff Davidson returned. 10 minutes. The locksmith had finished the main entrance and moved to the service doors. The new keys jangled on his ring, my keys to my house. Catherine Cole made one last play. Surely we can discuss this like civilized people. There must be some arrangement. The arrangement was the lease. You violated it. We'll pay whatever you want. Patricia laughed. With what your accounts are frozen pending fraud investigation. Your credit lines are maxed. You have no liquidity and no assets except what you're wearing. I looked at Catherine's jewelry, Harrison's watch, Barrett's cufflinks, Tessa's gown. Keep them. Consider it severance for the entertainment you've provided. You're evil, Tessa whispered. No, dear. I'm disappointed. There's a difference. A moving truck pulled up not for them, but for me. I'd hired it to collect certain items immediately, things the lease specified as fixtures that couldn't be removed. The chandelier that had hung here since 1923, the carved mantelpiece, the built-in library shelves. All mine now. You can't, Harrison protested as workers entered with tools. Page 17, subsection 4. Patricia quoted. All fixtures remain with property upon lease termination. The documentary director approached Patricia. Can we get a statement? Patricia deferred to me. I faced the camera. 2 years ago, this family was bankrupt. I bought this property and leased it back to them at generous terms. They violated those terms extensively and are now facing consequences. That's business. I paused. What isn't business is how they treated the woman who saved them. They didn't know I was their landlord. They only knew I was Tessa's mother. That told them I was worthless. 1 minute, the sheriff called. The Coles grabbed what they could: phones, a coat, Catherine's purse. Security pushed them toward the door. Tessa stood frozen until Barrett yanked her arm. Move, unless you want to be arrested. As they crossed the threshold, my threshold, I called out, Tessa. She turned, mascara streaming down her face, hair fallen from its elaborate style, designer dress dragging on the ground. Your old room is still set up above the hardware store. Same bed you complained about. Same dresser you said was embarrassing. The keys under the mat where it's always been. For a moment, her face shifted. The mask cracked, showing the girl I'd raised. Then Barrett pulled her into the night, and the mask reformed. 12:59 A. The doors closed. the locks engaged. The Coles stood on the lawn, my lawn, as rain began to fall. Their guests had fled. Their cars were being towed. The lease included the garage spaces. They had nowhere to go and no way to get there. Through the window, I watched them call an Uber. 1 a.m. The property is secured, Sheriff Davidson confirmed. It's all yours, Ms. O'Keefe. I walked through my mansion, Patricia beside me, the documentary crew trailing. Empty rooms echoed with possibility. The caterers had left food mine now. The champagne still chilled mine too. You did it, Patricia said. Yes. Any regrets? I touched the console table where Tessa had set down countless purses, never knowing her mother owned the marble beneath them. Just one. What's that? I should have brought a bigger suitcase. Patricia laughed, but I didn't. Because despite everything, despite the victory and vindication, the truth sat heavy in my chest. I'd gained a mansion, but lost a daughter. The price of dignity, it turned out, was exactly what I'd always feared it would be, everything that actually mattered. But at least now, the bill was paid in full. The mansion stood empty, except for me and my suitcase. Patricia had left at 1:30, the documentary crew at 2. Now, at 3 I walked through rooms that echoed with nothing but my footsteps on marble floors. I climbed the grand staircase. My hand trailing along the banister Tessa had slid down as a child during our one visit here for a charity open house. She'd been 8, eyes wide with wonder, whispering, "Someday, Mommy, we'll live in a house like this. Be careful what you wish for, baby girl." The master bedroom door stood open. Their clothes still hung in the walk-in closet. They had 72 hours to retrieve belongings. Under supervision, Barrett's Princeton blazer, Tessa's wedding dress, preserved in plastic. The life they'd built on borrowed ground. I didn't enter. Instead, I chose a small room at the back, servants' quarters from another era. It had a single bed, a plain dresser, a view of the ocean, everything I needed, nothing I didn't. I set my suitcase on the bed and unpacked slowly. The legal documents went into the dresser. My grandmother's pearls returned to their worn velvet box. At the bottom of the suitcase, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a photograph Tessa at 5, missing her front teeth, hugging me outside Harbour Ridge Elementary on her first day of school. "Don't ever leave me, Mommy," she'd said then. Never. I'd promised. Promises, it turns out, are just words we hope will become truth. My phone buzzed. 17 missed calls. 43 texts. The news had spread like wildfire through Harbour Ridge. Former colleagues from the hospital expressed shock. Northbridge partners offered congratulations. James himself texted, "Well played, lesson learned," but nothing from Tessa. I walked to the window, far below. The ocean crashed against the cliffs, indifferent to human drama. The same waves that had witnessed the Coles parties now witnessed their absence. Nature's ultimate democracy, the tide comes for everyone. At 4 a.m. Headlights swept the driveway. For a moment, my heart jumped. Maybe Tessa, coming to talk, to understand, to bridge the chasm between us. But it was just security, making their rounds. My security now, protecting my empty victory. The morning papers would be brutal. The Coles' social execution would be complete, documented in high definition. The mighty had fallen, and Harbour Ridge loved nothing more than watching giants topple. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I called Patricia at 7 a.m. I want to sell it. The mansion. But you just... I know what I did. Now I want to undo it. List it immediately. Marion, you're exhausted. Take a few days. List it. Today, 20% below market. Cash only. Quick close. That's millions you're leaving on the table? It was never about the money? She sighed. What about the Coles belongings? Ship them wherever they land. I'll cover the cost. And Tessa. I looked at the photograph still in my hand. What about her? The personal loan defaults will destroy her credit. The fraud investigation could implicate her. She'll lose everything. She already lost everything that mattered when she chose them over us. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. She was still my daughter. She would always be my daughter. And mothers, real mothers, don't let their children drown, even when those children push them under. Set aside enough from the sale to cover her debts, I said finally. Don't tell her it's from me. Make it look like an insurance settlement or a found account, something that preserves her pride. That's $2 million. I know what it is. You're saving someone who publicly called you nobody. I'm saving my daughter. There's a difference. Patricia was quiet for a moment. You're a better person than any of them deserve. No, I'm just a mother. We don't get to stop being mothers because our children disappoint us. I hung up and walked back through the mansion one last time. In 12 hours, I'd transformed from nobody to nobody again. The circle complete. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mom. Tessa's voice, small and broken. I'm at your apartment, above the hardware store. The key was under the mat, like you said. I said nothing. Barrett left. His parents blame me for not knowing about you, about the money. They say I should have investigated, should have known. Still, I said nothing. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I chose wrong. I chose them over you, and now I've lost everything. No, I finally spoke. You've lost nothing that matters. You have a bed, a roof, a mother who left the key under the mat despite everything. That's not nothing. Can you forgive me? Forgiveness isn't a moment. Tessa, it's a process. And it starts with you forgiving yourself for wanting more than what we had. I don't even know who I am anymore. Then find out. Without them, without their money, without their judgment, find out who Tessa O'Keefe is when she's not trying to be someone else. Will you help me? I looked at my suitcase, still open on the bed. The same suitcase she'd mocked. The same one that had carried everything that mattered through every phase of my life. I'll be there in an hour, I said. I'll bring breakfast, real food, not that organic nonsense the Coles pretended to enjoy. Mom? Yes. Your suitcase, bring it. I want to apologize to it too. I laughed then, really laughed, for the first time in months. It's just a suitcase. Honey? No, she said, and I could hear her father's wisdom finally surfacing in her voice. It's not. It's proof that value isn't in the price tag. It's in the miles traveled, the loads carried, the faithful service. I was too blind to see that. 1 hour, I repeated. I love you. Mom. I know. Baby. I've always known. I packed my suitcase one more time. Clothes this time, not documents. Tomorrow I'd move back to my apartment, back to my real life. The mansion would sell within a week. Patricia was right about that. The money would go to securing Tessa's future. Quietly, invisibly, the way mothers' sacrifices usually go. the Coles would recover or not. Their story was no longer my concern, but my daughter's story that was just beginning again. And this time, maybe, she'd write it in her own hand, not theirs. I wheeled my suitcase down the marble stairs one last time. At the door, I turned for a final look. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny celebrations in the air. The mansion was beautiful, cold, empty, beautiful. But home was a small apartment above a hardware store, where a broken daughter waited for her mother's forgiveness, and a mother waited to give it. The door closed behind me with a solid click, the lock engaged. I drove away from Seabright Bluffs, my suitcase in the trunk, my grandmother's pearls around my neck, and something like hope blooming in my chest. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't keeping what you've taken. Sometimes it's knowing when to let it go. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us what really matters, not the mansions we might gain, but the people we might lose along the way.